In light of today's presidential inauguration, I couldn't help but think about inaugurations in general and what they represent. They really mark the furthering of a kingdom, so to speak. America has had an incredible run of presidential inaugurations. I mean, think about the speeches, the pageantry. It really symbolizes something remarkable in our democracy. And that's the successful and safe transition of leadership at the highest levels. It really is remarkable. But as I said, inaugurations also point to the continued building of a kingdom. Now, I know America is not a kingdom per se, but I use this language because one, it's biblical, and two, we've been building and fighting for something in our country for hundreds of years. It's built not on the backs of a family or leader or tribal warrior, but rather on the back of a dream, a democracy, a hope that free people can govern and protect and serve and love themselves. But as significant as our attempt has been, America pales in comparison to another kingdom. I'd be remiss as your pastor and spiritual leader in the community if I did not bring in front of you a comparison between worldly kingdoms like America and the kingdom of God. It should be stated, the United States is not the kingdom of God. God never intended it to be, nor have we ever lived up to those ideals. As Americans, we are not God's chosen people. God never intended us to be, nor have we ever lived up to those ideals. Now, we are God's people, but not for the reason that we were born in America, or that we were born white, or that we are Christian by heritage for that matter. I mean, God's people aren't bound to nationalities. Jesus saw to this. God's people aren't bound to race or color. Jesus saw to this. God's people aren't even bound by religious affiliation. Jesus saw to this. He actually inaugurated this. And that's a magnificently important point that must be made. The kingdom of God is not, nor has it ever been, America only, or America first. It's always been for all people, everywhere, always. It's bigger and wider and vaster, more loving and more inclusive than anything we could build on our own on earth. Now, I'm by no means trying to shame or belittle the American experiment. I'm proud of it. It has been worth fighting for. But it's clear that as of late, we have somehow and in some unconscious way married these two loosely connected thoughts, and we now see them as one. And what I'm talking about is the rise of Christian nationalism. It's a weird, sinful, idolatrous, wrongful ideology. If you've never heard this phrase, Christian nationalism, you need to look it up. The Baptist Joint Committee has great resources on it. I've included those resources under our Faith Formation page on our website. It's time that you educate yourself, because a growing number of people in our country, Christian people, are getting nationalism and faith confused. So I want to put something in front of you as a Christian. As great as the American experiment is, which it is, we are called to a better kingdom under the rule of a better king. I've heard it said that roughly 60% of Jesus' spoken words in the gospel are about and in reference to the kingdom of God. Now, I've never counted, but the sentiment seems to be true. You think about the parables and prayers, conversations with Pharisees, Pilate, private moments with disciples, his words about the temple, or just the Sermon on the Mount. I mean, it is page after page in all four Gospels. Jesus discloses more and more about the kingdom of God on earth. Now, we've got a lot of material to work with, and we have a lot of reason to try to understand it. So let's talk about it. Everything I'm about to say and everything has to do with what the kingdom of God is. And it has little to nothing to do of any form of nationalism anywhere, especially America. So let's start. What is the kingdom of God? It's the performing acts of God to the world, and then the actions of the world for God. In other words, it's God's total reclaiming of the world. It's holistic deliverance and the response from the world once delivered. As Christians, we believe this kingdom manifests most thoroughly through Jesus Christ and then the works of the church. Now, granted, God's kingdom manifests in other ways too, but we see most clearly that the ways of Jesus invite us and others to participate in kingdom work. So we should probably ask, who performs this kingdom work? Initially, God does, or did. God inaugurated it through creation in Christ. When Jesus entered the world as a baby, the kingdom unleashed itself. But that doesn't mean we just sit around and do nothing. We must find and participate in that kingdom work. So you could say the work moves from God onto us. But since I believe that God is always active and relational and openly moving in the world, I guess we should say that God's work openly incorporates us. So if there's work to be done, where then do we do it? Where is God's kingdom? Baptist ethicists David Gushee and Glenn Stassen really help here. They argue that there are 7 marks of the kingdom that point us to where it is in real time. Wherever we see deliverance, peace, joy, justice, healing, rebuilding of community in God's presence, that's where the kingdom is. And that's the work Christians are called to go and do. Deliverance, peace, joy, justice, healing, rebuilding of community in God's presence. Now you may be wondering, why do we need this kingdom? And my answer to that would be, I don't guess we do. You are welcome to live your life building your own kingdom all you want. You can focus on your own comforts and wants, and you don't ever have to give thought or much weight to what God is doing in the world or what the church is doing in response. But that doesn't mean that the kingdom isn't among us. And by participating in it, giving our lives to advancing it, we find life-altering salvific change and purpose. So how does this kingdom advance? The answer should be church, but that's not always the case. The kingdom advances whenever acts of justice and deliverance and the other 7 marks manifest themselves in real time. Deliverance, peace, joy, justice, healing, rebuilding of community, and God's presence. And that's altogether a different mission than that of the American dream. Don't get me wrong, today is historic, no doubt. I'm proud to be an American, but that pride, it pales in comparison to the joy I have in serving and partnering alongside another kingdom that Christ inaugurated on earth. I think it's time Christians pay serious attention to how we're participating and advancing in the kingdom of God.